Welcome, my fellow horror enthusiasts, to another spine-chilling episode of Mr. Terror Tales. If you found your way here, it means you're no stranger to the darkness, the twisted stories that linger in the shadows, and the terrifying tales that send shivers down your spine. As Christmas approaches, we've prepared something truly disturbing for you tonight. A special horror collection. 3 unique stories that will take you into the darkest corners of the holiday season. These aren't your typical feel-good Christmas tales. No, these are stories soaked in fear, secrets, and the kind of terror that thrives on silent nights and cold, lonely hours. If you've been with us before, you know that Mr. Terror Tales is not for the faint of heart. You crave the unsettling, the unnerving, and the downright horrific, and we're here to deliver just that. So if you're ready, grab a blanket, dim the lights, and settle in. These stories are going to haunt you long after they end. Remember, keep your wits about you, because what lurks in these tales is far more than just fiction. Emma had always felt the icy grip of fear in her heart whenever Christmas came around. The lights, the joy, the presents, none of it mattered. She had grown up in a house where Christmas was marked by drunken arguments and cold silences. Tonight, she couldn't stand it anymore. As the clock struck midnight, Emma slipped out of her room, a tattered red coat pulled tightly around her frail frame. Her brown hair, messy from sleep, hung in loose strands over her shoulders, her face pale and tired. Her hands, trembling, gripped the worn fabric of her coat as she slipped past her parents' bedroom, ignoring the sounds of shouting that echoed through the thin walls. The cold Christmas air slapped her face as she stepped outside, the ground covered in a blanket of snow. The streets were deserted, save for a few stray cats and the distant hum of traffic. She had no money, no plan, but all she knew was that she had to escape. As she wandered, lost in thought, she spotted the faint outline of a church in the distance. The steeple towered against the black sky, the sound of the bells ringing eerily through the silent night. She made her way toward it, desperate for warmth and shelter. The heavy wooden door creaked as she pushed it open, the warmth of the church wrapping around her like a strange comfort. The air inside was thick with the smell of incense and old wood, the flickering light of candles casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. She looked around, unsure if anyone was there, when a tall figure appeared from the shadows. Father Nathaniel stood at the far end of the nave, his figure imposing in the dim light. His black cassock hung loosely from his thin frame, and his face, pale and hollow, looked almost sickly. His eyes were dark, bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept in days, and his smile was barely a twitch on his lips. "Come in, child. You are safe here." Emma hesitated but stepped inside. She made her way toward a pew near the altar, her footsteps echoing in the vast empty space. As she settled into the cold wood, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The church felt too quiet, too still. She tried to ignore the unsettling chill creeping down her spine as she pulled her coat tighter around her. Hours passed, the silence weighing down on her as she tried to sleep. But then a faint sound reached her ears, a whisper so soft she almost thought she imagined it. "Help me." The voice was weak, broken, carried by the cold air. Emma's heart began to pound in her chest. She held her breath, straining to hear again. The whisper came once more, this time louder. "Help me, please!" With a sense of dread clawing at her, Emma slowly rose from the pew. She moved toward the sacristy, the old wooden floors creaking beneath her boots. There was a light from behind the door, a flickering glow, and she felt a surge of fear as she slowly turned the knob. What she saw inside made her blood run cold. Father Nathaniel was kneeling in front of a cracked mirror, his face a twisted mask of agony. Behind him, the figure of a woman began to materialize. Her presence felt more than seen at first. As she took shape, Emma saw that the woman was dressed in a tattered white gown, her skin ghostly pale and her hair tangled with dirt. Her eyes, empty hollow voids, stared straight through Emma, sending chills down her spine. "He killed me. He killed me." Father Nathaniel trembled in place, his voice a frantic whisper as he mumbled prayers as if begging for forgiveness. But it was too late. The spirit of his dead wife had risen once again to claim him. She had died years ago, murdered by her own husband. Each Christmas her vengeful spirit returned, her anger growing stronger with every passing year. Emma's stomach twisted with dread as the ghost's cold hand reached out toward her, brushing the air. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body felt paralyzed. The walls of the church seemed to close in around her, trapping her in a nightmare that would never end. She was no longer a guest in this place. She was another soul trapped in its cold, dark embrace. Rui had always been curious about his grandfather's isolated home in the village of Pedras Altas, a small, remote place tucked deep in the hills of Portugal. He had heard rumors, whispers, but always dismissed them as old superstitions. Christmas in this quiet village was a time of tradition. Families gathered around fireplaces, exchanging gifts and sharing stories of old. But Rui had a nagging feeling, a strange unease in his stomach as he arrived on Christmas Eve. His grandfather, Abelardo, was a man of imposing stature, his broad shoulders hunched from years of hard labor. His face, weathered and lined with age, was always hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling sharpness. He lived alone in a large, crumbling farmhouse on the outskirts of the village, his presence as much a mystery as his home. Rui knocked on the door, his breath fogging in the cold night air. When it opened, Abelardo's towering figure filled the doorway. The old man was dressed in a thick woolen coat, patched in several places, and his boots were worn and cracked from years of use. His eyes studied Rui with an intensity that made him feel like a stranger in his own family. "Come in, boy." Inside, the house was cold, the air heavy with the scent of wood smoke and something sour. The fire crackled weakly in the hearth, casting shadows across the dark wooden floors. Abelardo led Rui to the dining room where a small meal was waiting. The table was set with care, yet the room felt suffocating, oppressive. After dinner, Abelardo's demeanor shifted. He seemed distant, his eyes constantly flicking toward the door leading down to the basement. Rui felt the tension building, a weight pressing down on him. He tried to shake it off, assuming it was just the isolation of the house getting to him. But when his grandfather motioned for him to follow, his unease deepened. Abelardo led him down the creaky stairs to the basement, the wooden steps groaning beneath their feet. The air grew colder as they descended, the smell of decay thickening with each step. At the bottom, Rui felt his blood run cold as he saw the horrors his grandfather had hidden in the darkness. There, chained to the walls, were several emaciated figures, their faces gaunt, eyes hollow with fear. Their clothes were tattered rags, their bodies covered in bruises and sores. The dim light from a single hanging bulb cast grotesque shadows on their suffering. What is this, Grandpa?" Abelardo's face twisted into a grim smile, his eyes cold. "This is my legacy, Rui. I've been doing this for years. They wander into the village and I take them. They're mine now. It's the only way to keep the darkness at bay." Rui stumbled back, his stomach turning as the realization hit him. His grandfather, the man he had always admired, had been abducting and torturing people for years, keeping them in his basement as if they were nothing more than livestock. Before Rui could react, his grandfather grabbed him by the wrist, his grip tight and unyielding. "You'll carry this on, Rui. This is the family tradition. You'll understand in time." Rui struggled, his heart pounding in his chest, but the cold, empty eyes of the tortured souls in the basement followed him, their silent pleas filling his ears. His Christmas visit had turned into a nightmare, and there was no escape. Story 3. The Dark Forest of Christmas. 5 friends, Carlos, Lina, Joaquim, Inez, and Marta, had long planned their Christmas getaway. A cabin deep in the woods, far from the bustle of the city, was the perfect place to escape the holiday chaos. They packed their bags with warm clothes, thick scarves, mittens, and woolen sweaters, and set out for the secluded spot, excited for a few days of peace and fun. The forest around the cabin was quiet, the snow thick beneath their boots as they hiked through the trees. The air was still, and the only sounds were their voices and the crunch of snow underfoot. The night had fallen quickly, and by the time they reached the cabin, The sky was completely dark, save for the faint glow of stars above. Inside, the fire was crackling in the stone hearth, casting a warm glow across the room. They laughed and joked, sharing stories of past Christmases as they sipped on hot cocoa, their breath steaming in the cold air. But as the night deepened, something changed. The wind picked up, howling through the trees outside, and a strange, oppressive silence fell over the group. Later, as they settled into their rooms, they began to hear it, a low growl from the woods, deep and guttural like an animal hunting in the dark. It grew louder, closer, until it was almost deafening. But the most chilling part was the whispering. Faint at first, but growing clearer with each passing moment. Whisper, "Vo. Come to us. Come to us." Carlos, ever the skeptic, decided to investigate. He pulled on his boots and jacket, stepping out into the cold night. The others hesitated but followed. The forest seemed different now, unnaturally still, the trees looming like dark sentinels around them. They ventured deeper into the woods, the growls and whispers growing louder, echoing through the trees. The air grew cold, colder than it should have been, and soon they realized they were lost. The trees closed in around them, the path they had taken vanished, swallowed by the dark. In the distance, they saw it, an altar, made of stone and covered in ancient symbols. The ground around it was stained with something dark, something thick and wrong. As they approached, a figure emerged from the shadows, tall, skeletal, with glowing red eyes and skin like decayed bark. Its presence was suffocating, and the air around it crackled with dark energy. "Figure Vio, you shouldn't have come. The forest claims what it desires." Before they could flee, the darkness engulfed them. One by one, they were dragged into the shadows, their screams swallowed by the trees. The next morning, the cabin stood empty, the snow untouched by any sign of their disappearance. The forest kept its secret, and the whispers continued, always calling to those who dared to listen. And that, my friends, concludes tonight's twisted journey into the heart of Christmas horror. If these stories left you unsettled, know that this is only the beginning. Make sure you subscribe, hit the notification bell, and stay tuned for more tales that will torment your nightmares. There's always something lurking in the dark, and you never know when it might be your turn to face it. Until next time, stay safe, but keep an eye over your shoulder. After all, Mr. Terror Tales is always watching. Good night, if you dare. Subscribe to Mr. Terror Tales, like and share our channel. Merry Christmas and thank you for watching.